The dusty little town had grown used to its quiet rhythms, the creak of wagons on the dirt road, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the call of the saloon piano drifting through night air. Amid this simple life, Thomas Callahan had lived alone on his ranch for years, his reputation that of a hard-working but solitary man. He had sent word through a mail-order bride service, seeking a woman who could share his days of toil and evenings of silence, a companion to cook, tend the house, and perhaps bring warmth into a life shaped mostly by duty. His expectations were modest, even plain, for the letter described her as a woman of simple looks and steady character, someone practical rather than pretty. Thomas had told himself that beauty was a luxury he did not need, that what mattered was a trustworthy soul, someone who would stand beside him through droughts, storms, and winters. Yet beneath that stoic reasoning flickered a fear that she might arrive and he might feel nothing, leaving him trapped in a bargain of loneliness. On the morning of her arrival, Thomas dressed carefully, boots polished, hat straight, hands rough from labor but trembling slightly. He stood at the edge of the station platform, scanning the horizon as the train's whistle echoed across the prairie, bringing not just a stranger, but the possibility of change he had long denied himself. When the train screeched to a halt and the doors opened, passengers stepped down one by one, merchants, ranch hands, mothers with children clinging to their skirts. Thomas searched each face with guarded expectation until his gaze fell upon a figure that made him forget to breathe. She stepped down with quiet grace, her dress plain but carried as though woven from silk, her eyes wide with wonder and strength, her hair catching the sunlight in golden waves. For a moment, Thomas thought there must be some mistake, that this radiant woman could not be the bride promised to him. She carried herself with dignity, and though travel dust clung to her hem, no trace of weariness dimmed the brightness she brought. The station seemed to hush around her, men tipping hats unconsciously, women pausing in admiration. Thomas's heart lurched in his chest, unsteady, as though years of silence had been broken by one glance. When her eyes found his, there was no judgment or hesitation, only a small, knowing smile, as if she too had prepared for something plain, but found herself facing the unexpected. In that instant, Thomas understood that the words of a letter could never capture the truth of a soul, and the woman before him was far more than anything he had dared to imagine. As introductions were made, Thomas found his voice faltering in ways it never had before. He had spoken to cattle, to ranch hands, to traders, always with firm certainty. But here, before this woman, his bride-to-be, his tongue betrayed him, stumbling over simple greetings. She, however, spoke with calm warmth, her voice carrying the softness of a lullaby, yet with an undertone of resilience. Her name was Eleanor, and though she admitted with a blush that she had expected a rancher, rougher and older, her eyes betrayed a quiet relief. They exchanged few words as he carried her trunk to the wagon, but each glance between them seemed to weave threads unseen. On the road back to the ranch, the prairie stretched wide and endless, the sun painting the sky in hues of fire, and Eleanor marveled aloud at the beauty. Thomas, who had seen the same horizon countless times without pause, found himself watching it anew through her wonder. He realized that perhaps the greatest change she brought was not in her appearance, but in how she made the world around her seem alive, shimmering with possibility. That evening, as they reached the ranch, Thomas felt the silence of his home shift, as though walls long accustomed to loneliness now leaned in to welcome the echo of her laughter. The first days were filled with small adjustments, the awkward dance of two strangers learning to share space meant for one. Thomas expected difficulty, perhaps resentment, but Eleanor moved through the house with gentle assurance, turning each corner into something warmer. She cooked not just meals, but memories, filling the kitchen with scents that drew Thomas back to childhood, when his mother's hand had steadied him. She tended the garden with patience, her fingers coaxing life from the dry soil, and each evening she asked him questions, not about cattle or fences, but about himself, questions no one had thought to ask in years. Thomas found himself answering, sometimes haltingly, sometimes with surprising ease, and in her listening he discovered a comfort deeper than he had imagined. Her beauty, though striking, became less about her face and more about the light she brought into weary spaces. At night, as he lay awake, he marveled not just at her presence but at the way his heart, long hardened, now beat with a rhythm of anticipation, as though every dawn promised something new. Yet beauty was not without its price. The town, small and sharp with gossip, began to murmur. Men admired her too boldly, women whispered envy, and some wondered aloud what such a woman could want with a plain rancher like Thomas. He bristled at their stares, protective yet uncertain, fearing that perhaps they were right, that one day she might see in him only the rough edges, the solitude, the lack of charm. Eleanor, however, seemed unaffected. She met every gaze with dignity, never wavering in her loyalty. When Thomas voiced his worry, she laughed softly, saying that she had chosen him not for appearances or wealth, but for the steady strength she had sensed even from his letters. Her words pierced through his doubts, reminding him that beauty was not a mask to be admired, but a truth that could see deeper than fear. Still, Thomas wrestled with his insecurities, torn between gratitude and disbelief that such a woman could truly belong at his side. One evening, as a storm rolled across the plains, lightning tearing the sky and wind rattling the windows, Eleanor revealed the deeper layers of herself. They sat by the fire as rain battered the roof, and she spoke of the life she had left behind, a household where she was treated as a burden, where her worth was measured only by chores done and silence kept. She had come west not for escape alone, but for the chance to be valued, to be chosen. As she spoke, her beauty glowed not from her face, but from her courage, her willingness to bear her scars. Thomas listened, his heart twisting with both sorrow and admiration, and in her confession, he saw not fragility but strength that matched his own. When the storm passed, he realized that she was not just a bride sent by fate, but a partner carved by trials, her resilience a mirror to his. In that moment, he vowed silently that he would never let her feel unwanted again, that whatever storms awaited, they would face them together. The seasons turned, and with them, their bond deepened. Eleanor's laughter rang across the ranch, her presence transforming it from a place of labor into a home. She walked the fields with Thomas, learning the rhythms of ranch life, her hands blistering but never faltering. He marveled at her determination, at the way she embraced hardships without complaint, her spirit shining brighter than the sun over the prairie. The neighbors, once doubtful, began to see that hers was not a beauty of vanity, but of substance, and even the gossip quieted in the face of her quiet strength. Thomas, who had once believed himself unworthy, now realized that love was not about deserving, but about choosing, and they had chosen each other fully. One night, under a sky thick with stars, Thomas finally spoke the words he had long buried. He told her of his loneliness, of the fear that had shadowed him, of the nights he had wondered if he was meant to live alone forever. Eleanor took his hand, her eyes glistening, and whispered that she had feared the same, that she too had thought love was not for her. But in each other, they had found not just love but recognition, a home for their weary hearts. The kiss they shared under that endless sky was not one of passion alone, but of promise, sealing the bond that had grown from doubt into certainty. With time, their story spread as one of the town's quiet legends, the tale of a rancher who expected a plain bride and instead found a beauty whose grace reshaped his life. Yet those who knew them closely understood that the true wonder was not in her looks, but in the love that blossomed between them. A love built on shared burdens, whispered dreams, and the courage to begin again. Eleanor and Thomas became a symbol that beauty was not just something seen, but something lived, something that breathed life into every corner it touched. Years later, as the ranch thrived and children's laughter filled the air, Thomas often looked at Eleanor with the same awe he had felt that first day at the station. Time had changed them both, Yet her beauty had never faded, because it was rooted not in youth, but in the unyielding spirit that had first captivated him. He knew then that fate had not played a trick on him, but had given him a gift beyond measure, a woman who had turned his solitude into joy, his fear into strength, his plain life into something extraordinary. And though the world might remember her as the beauty who surprised him, Thomas knew the deeper truth. She had not just changed his life, she had completed it.